But staying with the U.S. election countdown, let's speak now to another analyst who is speaking to us, in fact, from Oregon. We'll speak to Pacific University Professor James Moore. Good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about, but I think I want to start off with my colleagues in New York City talking about how Kamala Harris on Saturday night making an appearance on Saturday Night Live, a comedy live show. And then, of course, just recently we saw Donald Trump on a garbage truck as well. So let's talk about some of the standout moments for you in the run-up to this election and how far these two candidates have gone to grab your attention as the electorate.
Yeah, this is wild. I've been covering elections for a long time. This election is remarkable because most Americans have made up their mind. They're not going to shift. It's a fight, as you just heard, it's a fight over a few thousand votes. And so how do you get to those few thousand votes? So appearing on Saturday Night Live, there is a tradition of mainstream American politicians going on to comedy shows like that. In the 1960s, for instance, Richard Nixon, Republican running for president, appeared on the very popular show Laugh-In. He had one line, but it was remarkable, and it may have shifted the election itself. So there's a long history of it. Interesting, their comment about the fairness doctrine. You have to have equal time. That was actually done away with pretty much in the 1980s because Ronald Reagan didn't like it. Ronald Reagan, the president who came out of Hollywood and knew how the entertainment business worked. And so it's just fascinating to watch this. Donald Trump on the garbage truck. As many people make fun of him for that as say that was a good jab at the Democrats for that, we're split right down the middle. So these efforts to get to voters, and remember, just a few voters, it may just be 40,000 voters out of 150 million who actually make a difference in this election. Anything to get to those voters is what they're doing.
Yeah, and there's always the question around whether or not some of those tactics are actually working and are going to be swaying the electorate. But that, of course, remains to be seen. I want to actually just focus a little bit. I know that you're in Oregon. There, some of the ballots already turned in where you are. Talk to me about where you are particularly and what the sense is going to be around how this election impacts your state. I think it's, 1 million ballots already turned in?
Yes, indeed. We've had vote by mail now for 25 years, so we always do our votes ahead of time. Now about 40 to 50% of voters actually hold on to them till the very last day and turn them in then. So we have this long process going on. About a third of our ballots have already come in. So here's the sense here. At the presidential level, Oregon is a solidly blue state. It will vote for Kamala Harris. There's no doubt about that. But there's concern and trying to figure out what a Trump administration would mean. Here in Oregon, for instance, a lot of our lands are actually owned by the federal government, owned by the national government. And from those lands, we have especially a lot of forestry. A lot of people want to use them for timber. There's entire industries that are based on that, as well as people who graze cattle on federal lands. Those kinds of things are up in the air with this election. Very different views. What would happen if there was a Trump victory versus what there would happen with a Harris victory. And so there's concern at that level, but we're not a battleground state. And so we don't see all the presidential ads. We do, however, within the area that I live, have 3 of the 25 most important races for the House of Representatives going on in the entire country. So we're seeing ads for them all the time and getting pretty tired of them.
Yeah, well, I can tell you what South Africans certainly can relate to is that this year for us also was a year when we had a highly contested election. And in fact, one of the things that was spoken about prior to it was whether or not we listen to what the polling says about what the outcome of an election is actually going to be. Because a lot of it quite interesting. The New York Times, for instance, are really doing various surveys on what they expect the swing states to be doing and how they're looking. But how do you perceive what surveys and polls are saying, and if they really can be relied on in terms of helping people decide which way a vote will go?
Yeah, so at this point, the polls are pretty clear. It's going to be a very close election based only in those battleground states. Other states are not going to be close at all. They're either going to go all in for Trump or all in for Harris. And here's the issue that comes up with them. When voters watch those polls and hear about those polls, does it then make them say, for instance, a state like mine, why should I even vote? I'm not really going to have a say in the presidential election. So does it, in effect, suppress the voter turnout? Here's something now from more than 40 years ago. The way that the election night is coverage here is there's the national networks, and they're all in New York. They cover the elections. In 1980, Jimmy Carter conceded his race to Ronald Reagan at about 8 o'clock Eastern time. I'm 3 hours before that. It was 5 o'clock here on the West Coast. People simply stepped out of the polling lines and left and did not cast a vote. That's the kind of thing that we fear when we see the polling being such an important part of the coverage. Will it make people say, my vote doesn't count? So all the campaigns, presidential, congressional, local campaigns, are working very hard on getting turnout going right now, trying to say to people, it is important that you vote for this. If you don't vote for that particular race, make sure you vote for these races. They're very important to you. So that's the messaging.
Yeah, I'm also just keen to hear about the march that I know took place in Washington, D.C., and it's something that's been a talking point in international media platforms as well. Women coming out in Washington, D.C., marching in support of Kamala Harris. And, of course, one of the biggest electioneering tickets that she has been running on has been on the autonomy of women's bodies and abortion, a very big contentious issue in the U.S. But talk to me about whether or not that does give her some sort of advantage.
It does, and here's the main reason why. More women vote in this country than men do. It'll usually about 53% of the voters will be women, 47% men. A number of women across the political parties are very concerned about issues like abortion, but also all autonomy as well. Trump's comments in the past week that he will help women whether they want it or not is seen as very patronizing by women across the political spectrum. And so Kamala Harris is trying to ride that, to make sure that women turn out. The march was evidence of that. We're seeing smaller marches beginning to happen in other places around the country as well, of women saying it's important that we vote. Now, are a whole bunch of women, tens of millions, going to support Donald Trump? Absolutely. But as a group, women tend to support the Democrats. In this race, we've had in the United States what's called the gender gap, women supporting Democrats, men supporting Republicans for a long time. Right now, that gender gap is the largest it has ever been in the history of the United States.
Very, very interesting. Well, we're going to leave it there, Prof. But have you've turned in your ballot as well in Oregon?
Yeah, we get ours in the mail. I try to be the first to get it back to my counting office.
All right.
I can check it online to make sure it got in, and it did.